Hey everyone, I'm here to tell you that everything you see, smell, hear, touch, and taste isn't actually real. Well, at least not in the way you think of reality. Now, yes, indeed, you're sitting on a chair, and I'm here giving you what will hopefully be an amazing TED Talk. Let's keep our fingers crossed. But what you think of as reality and what you see and perceive cannot necessarily be called one and the same. Before we begin, I'd like to mention that I'm not a conspiracy theorist here to tell you that the government is lying to us, the moon landing was fake, we're being manipulated by lizards from the constellation Draco, though I won't be discounting these possibilities. I'm just here to make you understand one simple fact. Everything you've lived until now isn't real, well, at least not as you think of it as. So let me bring an old friend of ours in to help us. In the year 380 BC, Plato wrote his Socratic dialogue, The Republic, in which he explains his allegory of the cave, depicted by a simple story from which it draws its name. In this allegory, Plato likens the masses, uneducated in his philosophical ideals, as prisoners tied up in a cave, unable to turn their heads or do anything else but stare at the wall in front of them, upon which shadows are projected from a source of light behind them. Their jailers employ the use of puppets to trick them and make them reach false conclusions about their surroundings. The prisoners haven't seen anything but shadows their entire life, having grown up in the cave, believing them to be real objects and the extent of their reality. In certain versions of this allegory, one prisoner is released and allowed to explore the outside world. After overcoming his awe, bewilderment, and shock at having his entire reality turned upside down, and discovering that what he thought was the basis of existence was but shadows, reflections of real objects, he returns to the cave to inform his brethren of his discoveries. Upon telling them that they had been living a lie and that the jailers had been lying to them, he is promptly informed that his trip outside had turned him stupid and insane, and all his attempts at freeing them or showing them reality were met with physical violence and denial. Now, Plato uses this allegory to explain his theory of the forms, as well as furthering his idea of philosopher kings. Others cite this as an example on how easily we can be led to false conclusions if we're allowed to draw our own conclusions from limited data, and how set in our ways we can be, even if those ways are wrong. I'd like to skim the surface a bit more and explain how reflections or images of real objects can help us understand these images, these objects, such as the shadows would have helped the prisoners understand their surroundings had they known the true nature of the shadows, but may often be confused by the real thing, and this can lead to only confusion. For example, if a book had been waved in front of the fire, and that image projected upon the wall, as in the form of a shadow, the prisoners might, after having some discussion, come to the conclusion and named it a book. But they would have been naming the shadow as the book, and not as a shadow, and not the book, the item itself. And that is an important distinction, as we will come to see later. Now, one extraordinary thing about this allegory is that the freed prisoner, despite having his entire world turned upside down, and discovering that the entire basis of his reality were but shadows, never once considers the possibility, never once doubts, and thinks that maybe this new world, this real world, the one we live in, is again but a new set of shadows. A fact that you may be surprised to find out is actually true. Let me explain to you. In the case of our eyesight, many of you will actually know that what we see is but waves of light reflecting off objects and certain wavelengths reaching our eyes. Others will understand that this goes even further than that. The wavelengths are processed by our eyes to create an upside-down image, which is then coded into impulses sent from our optic nerve to our brain when an image is created. This is the image you see every day, and the shadow you will be confusing with the real thing. This distinction is fine but important. Let me walk you through a crude metaphor, in the case of a company surveying the amount of workers they employ. A way of seeing without shadows would be to directly survey or register the employees and keep track of them that way. Our way of doing things is more like counting how much products the employees create, which would be the wavelengths in this case, calculating how much employees there are from that, which would be the epsilon image, tabulating this information, the impulses through optic nerve, and then creating a visual representation, such as a pie chart or a graph, which would be the image in our brain. An important part of this is that we wouldn't understand the data until it reached its final stage. And while both reach the same conclusion in the end and portrays the same data, it is easy to confuse the products with the employees and forget that they are just a way of measuring the measurable quantity and not the measurable quantity itself. The same is true for other four senses. Touch, for example, is quite interesting. We never actually touch anything, just hover a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a distance above the surface of the object. The electron repulsion forces that keep us away from this object are registered by our fingers, and eventually the information reaches our brain, where, in a process not dissimilar to the one of eyesight, the feelings are stimulated. So, when you touch a smooth object, a rough object, or a sticky object, or any other texture, you're not actually feeling that texture, but you're feeling a stimulation from your brain based off what you know about that object. The entire situation is similar to our brain collecting information about the outside world to run a simulation almost identical for our practical purposes to the outside world, and then allowing us, and by extension our bodies and our actions, to react to the real world by reacting in real time to this situation. We have created a matrix of our own, a self-made simulation. We have trapped ourselves in our own cave, being both the jailer and the prisoner in this case. Now, a way of seeing without shadows is both far-fetched and impractical, and according to some, downright impossible. Our simulation suits us just fine for the moment, and is, for practical purposes, pretty ideal. We wouldn't even know how to approach the problem of skipping all these steps and going directly to the real object without seeing its image. However, keeping this kind of perspective on life helps us solve situations and problems that may otherwise leave us perplexed. For example, you have all heard of the famous color-changing dress. Is it black and blue, or is it white and gold? If you think about it in perspective, the answer is pretty meaningless, because there's no dress. What you see here is just a digitalized image consisting of very small pixels. And that's not even what you see. What you see is, as I said before, an image created by our brain based off the wavelengths coming off these pixels. But for those who would really like to know the truth about the color-changing dress, remembering the perspective of Plato's cave helps us a lot. If you remember this as but an image, a reflection of a real object, and not a dress itself, you may think to zoom into the individual pixels of the image and thus find the color of the overall image. So if this concept can help us solve such a perplexing, famous, but yet simple problem as the dress, imagine what you could do if you applied this to your whole reality, thinking that everything you've seen, smelled, heard, or otherwise felt through your senses isn't actually real. Now, up till now, in our self-made matrix, our cave, we've had a prisoner, a jailer, a wall, shadows, and a fire, but no puppets or puppeteers. This may not stay the same for much longer. With the increasing innovation in domains like neuroscience and the emergence of neural-based technologies, every day we run a higher risk of an invasion into our own little private matrices, having our simulations affected by artificial shadows, having the sanctity of our cave breached. So, before you move on to your next activity today, or your next talk, think about how everything in your life is fake and how this can affect your life. Thank you.